Hi VivaFam, this is Richa from Coach Viva. By the end of this video, you'll know how many calories theory says that you should eat versus what we have seen in practice work for our clients. Hint, unless you have a deadline coming up, how many calories apps and programs out there tell you to eat is actually far lower than you actually need to eat. I'll explain to you why, and I'll also explain the factors that go into your weight loss so that you can make the right call on what is the right calories you should be eating according to your situation. Alright, so let's get to it.
First, it's important to identify the difference between theory versus reality. 1 pound of fat is 3,500 calories. If you do the math, that means that 1 day of fat loss equals about 500 calories a day in a calorie deficit. That means you have to eat 500 calories less every single day than you burn in order to lose a pound a week. This is what most apps and programs tell you to do when you start, because most people want to lose about a pound a week. Now, this is all good in theory, but there are 3 factors to consider here. 1, weight loss is not linear. Take a look at this chart of my weight loss progress from some time in the past, and notice how often the line bounces up and down and up and down. These are fluctuations due to a lot of things like water retention, hormonal fluctuations, my sodium intake, my carb intake. If I had a big dinner that night before I weighed in, because I only weighed in the mornings, some of that residual food weight would have impacted it. If I eat like 500 milligrams of sodium more than normal, I can gain like 1 to 2 pounds just like that in 1 day. And you'll also notice that like every 3 to 4 weeks, you'll see the weight spike up and then drop again. And that is me during my period. So all of these factors can play a role in your weight fluctuations. Also, some bodies hold on to water more than others, especially when dieting. So what happens sometimes is that when you eat in a calorie deficit, you may lose fat from your fat cells. But instead of the fat cells shrinking, water will flush in. What it looks like is that you don't lose any weight because your fat cells have a lot of water in it still. But what ends up happening for a lot of people is that if they continue eating in the same calorie deficit, then after a few days to a week, they'll suddenly see a huge weight drop. There will be a certain point where it just suddenly releases all of the water that it's been hoarding, and then the fat cells will shrink. If you've ever been dieting and you didn't see progress, but then like 1 week, suddenly you drop like 2 to 3 pounds. That's what's going on there. The second factor to consider is that if you're doing exercise, especially intense exercise and strength training, you might be building muscle, especially if this is your first time doing these exercises. Now, in order to build muscle, you need extra energy than your body requires so that those extra energy can be used into building your muscles. And this is why really lean people who don't lose fat and only want to gain muscle are told that they need to eat in a calorie surplus. Thus, depending on how lean you are, a 500 calorie deficit may harm your goals of losing fat while building muscle. You can't do both because your body is already very deprived and in need of extra energy. The other complication is that the same amount of muscle weighs more than the same amount of fat. So take a look at these pictures of women who weigh the same, and yet they look very, very different because their body composition is different. Some have more muscle than others. You can see that some of them have a leaner body than others, even though they weigh the same, and that is because the leaner people have more muscle compared to fat. So some weeks you'll see no change in your scale weight, even though you might be losing fat. If you are tracking your body measurements like your waist, then you might notice that your waist is going down, even if your weight is not changing. That's a body recomposition happening. The third complication that may make this 500 calorie a day thing difficult especially applies to shorter women or older folks whose metabolism is already fairly low, which means you're already burning less calories every single day. For example, a sedentary 5'2" woman at 165 pounds has a maintenance calories of around 1,600 calories. So if you put her in a 500 calorie deficit, she'd be eating less than 1,200 calories a day. That is not enough room to get 3 square meals a day and feel satisfied at the same time for most people.
I'm going to give our recommendations on a case-by-case basis. Generally, I recommend that whatever are your maintenance calories, just subtract 200 calories from that and set that as your calorie target. This is a good enough deficit that you're going to start seeing a weight loss of about 1 to 2 pounds a week, and it's going to be sustainable enough for you where you won't feel uncomfortable with suddenly eating lesser than you're used to. Note that I said weight loss. I did not say fat loss. And the second point is if your BMI is already less than 21, then you do not want to be in a deep calorie deficit. A 200 calorie deficit is a minor enough deficit that your body is not going to freak out and start losing muscle in order to preserve your organs. The other thing to note is that as you lose weight, your maintenance calories is also going to drop. So you should be monitoring on a week-to-week basis of what your maintenance calories are depending on your new weight. And about every 10 weeks or so, you will notice that you will need to drop the calorie target in order to maintain that 200 calorie deficit. The second case is, let's say you're a woman who is about 5 feet 2 inches or somewhere on the shorter side, and you notice that, let's say, 200 calorie deficit puts you below the minimum recommended calorie target, which is 1,200 for women and 1,500 for men. In that particular case, you want to set your calories at the minimum recommended target, 1,200 for women, 1,500 for men. And then you want to introduce at least 2 progressive strength training sessions into your week, and at least 1 to 2 high intensity interval training sessions, cardio sessions, into your week as well, in order to create that 200 plus calorie deficit, because you're not able to create that calorie deficit with food alone. Now, what is progressive strength training and how to create a high intensity interval training routine? This requires videos of their own. If you're interested, side note, Lucy and I have written a whole book which talks about this video, and pretty much every video that we talk about is covered in that book. You can get it for free. I've put a link in the video description below. If you fall into this case, you don't actually have a lot of room to maneuver because you're eating so few calories anyway. And as a result, you may want to look into calorie cycling. So calorie cycling is basically eating less than the target that you have for some days and eating more than the target on some days. Usually about 1 to 2 days you can eat above whatever target you have. If it's 1,200 calories, you might eat at 1,300, and on the other days you might be eating at 1,100 calories. The third case is, let's say you're on a deadline and losing about 1 to 2 pounds of weight per week is too small for you. In that case, you want to set your calorie deficit pretty aggressively. So a 30% calorie deficit, like all the programs and apps out there put you on, that's the way to go. In addition to lowering your calories, you may also want to look into lowering your carbs. When you lower your carbs, your water retention in your body goes down, and as a result, you lose weight. Now, this weight is not fat loss. This weight is a lot of just glycogen and water loss, but on the scale and how you look, definitely looks like you've lost weight. Note that these types of tactics are really short term. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to sustain them after whatever deadline you're after. So only set yourself up on this aggressive calorie deficit and lowering your carbs if you really have a deadline that you need to shoot for. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of all of the factors that influence how you will lose weight, and also arms you with exactly what your calorie target should be depending on your situation. If you have more questions, go ahead and leave that in the comment. I would love to answer your questions. And if you love this content and you want more of it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and also hit that bell icon so that you get a notification every time we upload a video. All right, until next time.